Hello and welcome back. It is Sunday, July 12th in the afternoon, and I'm continuing again with a reading from Devotional Classics, edited by Richard J. Foster and James Bryan Smith. I don't know much about the Renovare group that put this out. Maybe I should do a little more research on it, but it's an interesting collection of texts on spiritual practices, Christian devotion, the life of discipleship, and I'm continuing today with the next reading from Francis de Sales, who, as far as I know, was a figure of the Counter-Reformation, which isn't from my tradition, but I'm sure that we'll pull out some good things. So Francis de Sales, an excerpt from Introduction to the Devout Life. You wish to live a life of devotion, dearest Philothea, because you are a Christian and you know that it is a virtue most pleasing to God's majesty. Since little faults committed in the beginning of a project grow infinitely greater in its course and finally are almost irreparable, above all else you must know that the virtue of devotion is. There is only one true devotion, but there are many that are false and empty. If you are unable to recognize which kind is true, you can easily be deceived and led astray by following one that is offensive and superstitious. In his pictures, Aurelius painted all faces after the manner and appearance of the woman he loved. And so too, everyone paints devotion according to his own passions and fancies. Someone given to fasting thinks himself very devout if he fasts although his heart may be filled with hatred. Much concerned with sobriety, he doesn't care to wet his tongue with wine or even water, but won't hesitate to drink deep of his neighbor's blood by detraction and gossip. Another person thinks himself devout because he daily recites a vast number of prayers, but after saying them he utters the most disagreeable, arrogant, and harmful words at home and among the neighbors. Another gladly takes a coin out of his purse and gives it to the poor, but he cannot extract kindness from his heart to forgive his enemies. Another forgives his enemies, but never pays his creditors unless compelled to do so by the force of law. All these individuals are usually considered to be devout, but they are by no means such. Saul's servants searched for David in his house, but David's wife, Michal, had put a statue on his bed, covering it with David's clothes, and thus led them to think that it was David himself who was lying there sick and sleeping. In the same manner, many persons clothe themselves with certain outward actions connected with holy devotion, and the world believes that they are truly devout and spiritual, whereas they are in fact nothing but copies and phantoms of devotion. Genuine living devotion, Philothea, presupposes love of God, and hence it is simply true love of God. Yet it is not always love as such. Inasmuch as divine love adorns the soul, it is called grace, which makes us pleasing to his divine majesty. Inasmuch as it strengthens us to do good, it is called charity. When it has reached a degree of perfection at which it makes us not only do good, but also do this carefully, frequently, and promptly, it is called devotion. Ostriches never fly, hens fly in a clumsy fashion, near the ground and only once in a while. But eagles, doves, and swallows fly aloft, swiftly and frequently. In like manner, sinners in no way fly up toward God, but make their whole course here upon earth, the earth, and for the earth. Good people who have not as yet attained to devotion fly towards God by their good works, but do so infrequently, slowly and awkwardly. Devout souls ascend to God more frequently, promptly, and with lofty heights. In short, devotion is simply that spiritual agility by which charity works in us, or by aid of which we work quickly and lovingly. Just as it is the function of charity to enable us to observe all God's commandments in general and without exception, so it is the part of devotion to enable us to observe them more quickly and diligently. Hence, anyone who does not observe all God's commandments cannot be held to be either good or devout. To be good, a person must have charity, and to be devout, in addition to charity, he must have great zeal and readiness in performing charitable actions. Since devotion consists in a certain degree of eminent charity, it not only makes us prompt, active, and faithful in observance of God's commands, but in addition it arouses us to do quickly and lovingly as many good works as possible, both those commanded and those merely counseled or inspired. A person just recovered from illness walks only as far as he must, and then slowly and with difficulty. So also a sinner just healed of an iniquity walks as far as God commands him, but he walks slowly and with difficulty until such time as he has attained to devotion. Then, like someone in sound health, he not only walks but runs and leaps forward on the way of God's commandments. Furthermore, he moves and runs in the path of his heavenly counsels and inspirations. To conclude, charity and devotion differ no more from one another than does the flame from the fire. Charity is spiritual fire. When it bursts into flames, it is called devotion. That's good. Hence, devotion adds nothing to the fire of charity except the flame that makes charity prompt, active, and diligent, not only to observe God's commandments, but also to fulfill his heavenly counsels and inspirations. Those who discouraged the Israelites from going into the promised land told them that it was a country that devoured its inhabitants. In other words, they said that the air was so malignant it was impossible to live there for long, and its natives such monsters that they ate humans like locusts. It is in this manner, my dear Philotea, that the world distorts holy devotion as much as it can. It pictures devout persons as having discontented, gloomy, sullen faces, and claims that devotion brings on depression and unbearable moods. But just as Joshua and Caleb held both that the promised land was good and beautiful, and that its possessions would be sweet and agreeable, so too the Holy Spirit, by the mouths of all the saints, and our Lord, by his own mouth, assure us that a devout life is sweet, happy, and lovable. The world sees devout people as they pray, fast, endure injuries, take care of the sick, give alms to the poor, keep vigils, restrain anger, control their passions, give up sensual pleasures, and perform other actions that are rigorous in themselves and by their very nature. But the world does not see the heartfelt inward devotion that renders all such actions pleasant, sweet, and easy. Look at the bees amid the banks of thyme. They find there a very bitter juice, but when they suck it out, they change it into honey because they have the ability to do so. O worldly people, it is true that devout souls encounter great bitterness in the works of mortification, but by performing them they change them into something more sweet and delicious. Because the martyrs were devout men and women, fire, flame, wheel, and sword seemed to be flowers and perfume to them. If devotion can sweeten the most cruel torments and even death itself, what must it do for virtuous actions? Sugar sweetens green fruit, and in ripe fruit corrects whatever is crude and unwholesome. Now devotion is true spiritual sugar, for it removes bitterness from discipline and anything harmful from our consolations. From the poor it takes away discontent, care from the rich, grief from the oppressed, pride from the exalted, melancholy from the solitary, and factiousness from those who live in society. It serves with equal benefit as fire in winter and dew in summer. It knows how to use prosperity and how to endure want. It makes the honor and contempt useful to us. Both honor and contempt useful to us. It accepts pleasure and pain with a heart that is nearly always the same, and it fills us with a marvelous sweetness. Consider Jacob's ladder, for it is a true picture of the devout life. The two sides between which we climb upward and to which the rungs are fastened represent prayer, which calls down God's love, and the sacraments which confer it. The rungs are various degrees of charity by which we advance from virtue to virtue, either by descending by deeds of help and support for our neighbor, or by contemplation ascending to a loving union with God. I ask you to regard attentively those who are on this ladder. They are either people with angelic hearts or angels in human bodies. They are not young, although they seem to be so because they are so full of vigor and spiritual agility. They have wings to soar aloft in holy prayer, and they also have feet to walk among people in a holy and loving way of life. Their faces are beautiful and joyous because they accept all things meekly and mildly. Their legs and arms and heads are uncovered because in their thoughts, affection, and deeds they have no purpose or motive but that of pleasing God. The rest of their body is clothed, but only in a decent light robe, because they use the world and worldly things, but do so in a most pure and proper way, taking of them only what is necessary for their condition. Such are devout persons. Believe me, my dear Philotea, devotion is the delight of delights and queen of the virtues, since it is the perfection of charity. If charity is milk, devotion is its cream. If it is a plant, devotion is its blossom. If it is a precious stone, devotion is its luster. If it is rich ointment, devotion is its beautiful scent. Yes, the scent of sweetness, which comforts humans and rejoices angels. Devotion must be exercised in different ways by the gentleman, the worker, the servant, the prince, the widow, the young girl, and the married woman. Not only is this true, but the practice of devotion must also be adapted to the strength, activities, and duties of each particular person. Philotea, true devotion does us no harm whatsoever, but instead perfects all things. When it goes contrary to one's lawful vocation, it is undoubtedly false. The bee, Aristotle says, extracts honey out of flowers without hurting them, and leaves them as whole and fresh as it finds them. True devotion does better still. It not only does no injury to one's vocation or occupation, but on the contrary adorns and beautifies it. All kinds of precious stones take on greater luster when dipped into honey, each according to its color. So also every vocation becomes more agreeable when united with devotion. Care of one's family is rendered more peaceable, love of husband and wife more sincere, service of one's prince more faithful, and every type of employment more pleasant and agreeable. When commanded to go to Ragus, young Tobias answered, I do not know the way, and his father replied, Go then and find someone to lead you. I say the same thing to you, Philotea. Do you seriously wish to travel the road to devotion? If so, look for a good person to guide you and lead you. This is the most important of all words of advice. As the devout Avila says, although you seek God's will, you will never find it with such certainty as on the path of that humble obedience so highly praised and practiced by all devout writers. Who shall find such a friend? The wise man answers, those who fear the Lord, that is, humble souls who sincerely desire to make spiritual progress. Since it is important for you, Philotea, to have a guide as you travel on this holy road to devotion, you must most insistently beseech God to provide you with one after his own heart. Have no misgivings in this regard, for he has sent down an angel from heaven as he did to young Tobias, will give you a good and faithful guide. The Bible reading from Romans 13, 8 through 10. Owe no one anything, except to love one another, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. The commandments: you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. So, on to the questions. Everyone paints devotion according to his own passions and fancies, writes Francis de Sales, meaning that we tend to emphasize the doing of certain spiritual disciplines with which we are comfortable while neglecting others. What are some of your favorite devotional practices? Which do you find the most difficult to do? So, that we emphasize the doing of certain spiritual practices which we find comfortable and neglect others. I think he gets to something deeper than that when he uses the different examples, such as another person thinks of himself devout because he recites daily a vast number of prayers, but after saying them he utters the most disagreeable, arrogant, and harmful words at home and among his neighbors. And there's a couple other examples. So it seems to be that it's not only preferring certain practices or disciplines and neglecting others, but almost doing certain things in order to cover up or put on the facade that we are actually spiritual persons, when it comes down to those moments where the rubber meets the road, the true person comes out, and like in that example, they're hateful to their family, friends, and neighbors in their words and actions. So it's not merely a neglect, but something more of which, you can essentially falsify an identity and not truly live up to it in the smallest things that reveal your true character. But I suppose there is still a sense in which, hey, I prefer, pouring myself into scripture, doing, practicing solitude, seeking the Lord, prayer, perhaps fasting, and neglecting maybe those things that would push us back out into the company of others, where it gets hard, right? To where loving others in the real situations of life is messy, it's difficult. Sometimes we would rather retire from that and use the things of the spiritual life to build up ourselves, but not for the purpose of going back out and benefiting the people of God, or reaching people with God's love. So I could see that as well. Favorite devotional practices? Which do you find most difficult? Well, I'll leave that up to us as individuals to parse out. I'll leave it there. Number 2. Francis speaks of the 3 stages of spiritual growth: a beginning awareness, grace, strength to do good works, charity, and the ability to do good frequently and promptly, devotion, and compares them to 3 types of birds: those that cannot fly, ostriches; those that fly clumsily, hens; and those that soar, the eagles. Which stage or bird best describes you, and why? Well, it is fascinating, right? How he views those stages: beginning of awareness, um, grace, strength in good works, charity, ability to do them frequently, devotion. So the ostrich, the hen, and the eagle. I think I would just add to this, right? Well, where does that strength come from? I guess these are exercises and that there's things that we grow in and get better at. But the strength to fulfill them and do them, and even in the growing and getting better at them, comes from the Lord himself. I think I would add that distinction. I don't think God is sitting back and saying, okay, well, let's see what they do. Like, all right, I've, maybe given them the tools. Up to you now. Well, I guess I would take the more reformed understanding of in and of myself, right? I can do nothing good apart from the Lord, right? He has to continually work in and through me, renew me by his Spirit. Jesus said, without me you can do nothing. So yeah, and where are we on that spectrum? Are we a ostrich, a hen, or an eagle? Well, that's up to us to discern. But we should all hope, to fly like eagles. I know one thing my dad always said was the eagle doesn't soar with the prairie chickens. Meaning, right, like the standards of that we hold for ourselves and who we associate with in life, they're going to determine how far we soar. So maybe we can add that, into the answer here, that like towards the end, right, he says, hey, you need to seek out someone who can lead you in the way, a good person, where he says, beseech God to provide you with one after his own heart. The prairie chickens hang out with prairie chickens. The ostriches hang out with ostriches. The eagles hang out with the eagles. Like, that's why he's saying, essentially, I think, look for an eagle. They're going to teach you how to fly. And I can see that, because I think I said in an earlier devotion, the idea of imitating those who have progressed in the Christian life, and are truly devout, truly rooted in God. We imitate them insofar as they imitate Christ, just as Paul alluded to or said. So if you're an eagle, if you aspire to be an eagle, fly with the eagles, as whatever that process looks like, start the journey. Number 3, what does the non-believer see as he or she looks at the life of a devout person? What do they not see? So he says that the world pictures devout persons as having discontent, gloomy, sullen faces, claims devotion brings on depression and unbearable moods. But they do not see a devout life that is sweet, happy, and lovable in itself, right? The world does not see the inward devotion that renders actions sweet, pleasant, and easy, and that it can sweeten the most cruel torments, even death itself. So perhaps the world sees that because they look at those who are essentially falsifying the spiritual life, right? Like, they see the one who can recite daily, prayers, vast number of daily prayers, and yet be disagreeable, arrogant, and harmful to their family and neighbors. Like, maybe that's what they're seeing like, hey, this person does good things, but they're actually not a good person, right? They and um, or maybe they might see that, hey, by pursuing the spiritual life, I'm giving up the things that would bring me pleasure in this world, right? So like they might think, oh well, these prudish people, like they don't do this, they don't do that, they don't party, maybe they don't drink or drink in excess, they don't they're not pursuing their lusts, they're not you know tearing other people down so they can get ahead, they're not pursuing wealth to the nth degree. They're miserable, right? These are the things that bring us the good life in the world, and maybe that's why they seem in their eyes seem like, oh, these sullen, discontented losers, right? um, but they don't see that sweetness and strength that brings comfort even in the most terrible of circumstances, even in the most cruel torments, because they don't have that, right? So when all those things are taken away from them, the pleasure, right, the wealth, the status, the everything else that the world might offer, when that's stripped away, and at some point it is, they feel injustice, right? The world has done me wrong. I am miserable without this, without the things that I thought would bring me a good life in this world. I am in misery. But on the opposite end, those who do pursue the spiritual life, they have that sweetness and fortitude that even when the things that they do have are taken away, even life itself, they are comforted, they are strengthened. I'm thinking of the apostles, praising God when they're in prison. Paul and Barnabas. What is it that would give that kind of fortitude to persons, right? That even when everything in life is taken away, right, that they're able to sing and have joy and gladness. I think that's what he's getting at here. That the world doesn't understand it, the world doesn't see it. They think, hey, you have nothing in the world's system, and by the world's standards, you should be miserable. But people who pursue God have their hope, their trust, their riches in God. They have already found the greatest treasure, right? Question 4. In Romans 13:10, Paul proclaims, love does no wrong. Francis de Sales writes in a similar fashion, true devotion does no harm whatsoever. When have you seen religious devotion actually do harm to others? Describe when you have seen religious devotion adorn and beautify others. Well, I think he roots devotion in charity, right? So they're both grace and charity are the expressions of divine love. The charity is outward, right? The love that we would show towards others, our neighbor, and the devotion is like the sweet scent of that, right? It goes with it. So we would have to say that devotion that harms others is just a purely false devotion, right? It's like those people, right, at the beginning that pray all the prayers but hurt their family and neighbors with their words. Or another example was another gladly takes a coin out of his purse, gives to the poor, but cannot extract kindness from his heart to forgive his enemies. Another forgives his enemies, but never pays his creditors unless compelled. That's the false devotion, right? When have you seen religious devotion adorn and beautify others? Well, when it is true, when it is rooted in that divine love, right? God's grace towards us and the charity that we show towards others. And it has nothing to do, or should have nothing to do, right, as far as we pursue it, right, that it should not be about us. I think of the words of John the Baptist here, right, where I must increase and he must, wait, I'm getting it backwards. I must decrease and he must increase. Do we have that mentality in our practice of devotion, right? Because that should be the mentality of I must decrease in the eyes of the world, right? In order for me to increase with God, I must decrease in this world and allow others to increase, right? So those are my thoughts on that. Number 5, Francis reminds us that devotion must be exercised in different ways, and it must be adapted to the strength, activities, and duties of each particular person. Given your level of spiritual energy, your weekly activities and duties, what kind of devotional habits fit your needs? Again, that's a very individual question, but I like when he said, true devotion does us no harm whatsoever, but instead perfects all things. And that every vocation becomes more agreeable when united with devotion. So, like he used the example, care for one's family is rendered more peaceable. Love of husband and wife more sincere. So the devotion can never be used as an excuse to not live up to the responsibilities that God has given to us. It cannot be used to destroy, right? Like one might say, oh, well, in order to pursue the spiritual life and true devotion to God, I can't take care of my kids to the capacity that I might be expected to. Well, that would be wrong, right? He's saying that true devotion does no harm to the individual, much less to the individuals that would be tangentially connected in our practice of devotion, right? So there's always a way to practice devotion in a way that fits the station, status, and just context of the Christian in their individual life. What does that look like for you? That's for each of us to discern. And that is the last question. Again, if you're enjoying this, just let me know. If you'd like to interact with any of the questions I've read, or have thoughts on some of the readings. There's only so much, right, I can dive into, but glad to hear anything that you are thinking about as well, and hope to see you again.